Hi, my sweet strangerlings. Welcome to Mystic Mondays. Today I have a very special guest, a skeptic. So let's get on with today's episode. Hi, Pamela. You are from Haunted Detective, but I'm going to hand it off to you. I want you to talk about like your background and your social media presence, your work offline, and all of that stuff.
I'm from the Haunted Detective podcast. And I just wanted to say first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on, Stephanie. I'm so excited to be here. This is so much fun. And a little bit of background about myself, other than being the co host on the Haunted Detective podcast, I started out with getting my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And I got to work alongside, as an intern, of course, with victim advocates and prosecutors and even detectives on cold cases. And so it was totally an honor to be a part of that realm. However, it's a very dark realm, and that's how I figured out that there is a lot of disrespect that happens with victims and survivors. And so then, as I dove deeper into it, I realized that there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that do romanticize people like Dahmer and Bundy and even Gacy. So after I found out about that, I really just went straight to the internet and I was just like, this is fucked up. Everyone needs to look at this and realize how horrible it is. And I got a lot of hate for it. I got death threats. I got all this insane stuff from what you would think would be common sense, but apparently it's not too common. So, with that, I then dipped my toes into the paranormal realm with just talking to people who are avid believers of the paranormal. And as you know, the host of the Haunted Detective podcast, Kelsey Childs, she's a medium. She has abilities that I can't comprehend, and I have a lot of friends like I've met along the way, like you guys. And so I've been able to talk to just an array of people. Even though I'm a skeptic, it's really cool to hear all these perspectives, and I'm so excited to share some of the stories that I have that I gaslight myself into believing are not paranormal. But maybe I'll have your opinion along the way.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm so excited because I'm really just so curious to hear your background. But I want to backpedal a little bit and just say, like, the work that you've done is so impressive and it's so important
Oh,
because,
thank you.
of course, yeah, because you're right. I mean, my background for there might be people that don't know this, but I've worked for BuzzFeed Unsolved. I made content for them. I was, talent and a producer in recent times in their short form side, and I feel like true crime is such an interesting community and niche. I say community
Yeah.
because there are some people that really want to make a difference, like yourself. And then there's like people that sensationalize, and it's so gross, which is one of the reasons why I have stopped doing true crime as much.
Yeah.
And I'm very selective with what I choose to talk about. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people change narratives online. They, for what reason, I don't get it.
Entertainment. Who knows?
Yeah. And I just, the other thing too is I had a few people that either were family members of victims or knew the victim, and it just really puts in perspective that we all have access to the internet, and so we need to be
Yeah.
mindful of what we say with these situations.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna get into your story too, but one thing that just keeps just I will see notifications time and time again is there's this TikTok video I made last year,
Hmm.
and even like before, it's the Natalia Barnett story.
Oh,
The
yeah. Yeah.
and it's like, it's disgusting what people say in that video. And I'm like, this is why I haven't reacted to it or made any follow ups because it
Yeah.
got to me. It really affected me. Because I err on the side that I believe she was a child that was severely mistreated and abused. And for people to
Absolutely.
say, like, oh no, she's an adult, I'm like, you just want to believe Orphan. That's what the movie Orphan.
Yep. Oh my gosh, yes. That is exactly what I was thinking. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, segueing into that, what about paranormal experiences? Like, what are things that you would say have been unexplained that like unexplained experiences that you've had that you can't quite put a finger on what it was, any reasoning?
Okay. So I have this one, and I had people who were there with me that did experience this. And I was in college at the time. I was like I think I was 19, like 19 and some change, really. Um but I so just for a little bit of background, this involves a local legend. And I went to Bowling Green State University, which is up top of Ohio. And there's a legend there that's called the Legend of Holcomb Road. And there was even a very low budget, love the low budget horror films, but there was a low budget horror film made about it. And so my friends and I want to say it was pretty cheesy. I think it was October of some sorts. And we were like, you know what? Let's go to the local McDonald's and we're going to sit and figure out a legend that we want to go and see for ourselves because we all just didn't really believe in anything. We just wanted to have fun. We were searching through legends and I had found the legend of Holcomb Road. And the legend of Holcomb Road was like the spookiest thing I had ever read. And so I turned my phone around to my friends and I was like, guys, you have to read this. Like, and you have to see this. So I read them the legend, and the legend says that a farmer wouldn't let his daughter date the son of a school bus driver. And one day, the driver transporting a bus full of kids down Wood County's Holcomb Road saw the farmer and snapped, driving the bus full of children into a tree and killed the farmer along the way. So hit the farmer and then hit the tree and then lost control. And apparently the bus like caught fire and killed all the children on board. And so I was like, this is insane. There's no way that this is real. And so when you look deeper into it, you find out that there's not like hard evidence that a school bus really exploded and that all these children like tragically died. Like there's no evidence of any of this, but it is a rural part of Ohio, so it wouldn't shock me that a farmer was there, and it wouldn't shock me if a farmer did something horrible like in the 1900s or whatever it was. And so it sounded like a perfect plot for a scary movie. So we decided to go. And the legend says that if you drive towards the road that has the arch of trees, so if you go down the road, it's a very skinny road out in the middle of nowhere. There's a really beautiful tunnel that the trees have made. And it's not man made, it's just a beautiful tree tunnel. And so it could be pretty spooky at night. But so they say if you drive down the road towards the tunnel, and you stop your car and you turn off your car and flash your headlights 3 times, that you will see the driver's face on the tree that he hit, and that ghostly headlights of the bus can be seen driving towards you. And some say that you'll even see the farmer. So I was like, guys, we have to go. It's like, we've got to see this. This is ridiculous. So we went and I drove my car that had 2 of my friends in it. And my other friend drove her other car that had our 2 other friends in that too. So my roommate in college at the time was not happy that she was being dragged along because she just was one of those people that believed in this stuff. And so but she didn't want to mess with it by any means. She was like, I don't want to mess with a legend, I don't want to mess with a ghost. Like that's just not, no way, I'm not going to get sucked into it. But I was like, come on, like it's fine, like nothing's gonna happen. We're gonna do the little thingy, like going into the bathroom and doing Bloody Mary or something, like, you know. I was like, it's gonna be fine, like relax. And so she was like, okay, whatever, but if we die, I'm coming back and I'm haunting you. And I was like, okay, that's fine, that's fair, I will take that trade. um so so we turned down the road and we're driving towards the tunnel of trees, and I was getting ready to turn my car lights off and flash them and do the whole legend when out of nowhere, I as soon as I stopped my car, this person appeared about like 10 feet in front of my car, and it was a large 8 foot tall figure with a sickle over his head running towards my car. And this was like 0.2 seconds. Like this was the fastest thing. Like I didn't even get to fully like turn off my car or anything. I had just stopped my car. And this freaked me out so bad. I whipped my little Honda Accord, my 2001 Honda Accord. I whipped that thing. I was squealing the tires. Like I went so fast, and my roommate and our guy friend in the back were screaming. And I don't know what made me do this, but the only thing that came out of my mouth was don't look. Because when I saw him, because I had to drive the car, obviously I wasn't about to just like wreck the car with all my friends inside. But so I saw the figure, it freaked me out, but I couldn't stop staring at it. And I saw it for like I said, it was like barely a second. And I whipped the car around and I just like went straight to the stop sign that was at the other end of the road. And so when I stopped, my friends were sobbing. Like we were all like freaked the living hell out. And I stopped the car, and my friend who hadn't even gotten to the road yet had stopped and was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "Did you not see that?" And she was in the other car, and so she didn't see anything that I saw, but the two people in the car with me saw exactly what I saw. And it was just the most baffling thing because it was completely gone. And so then I was like, I have to see for myself if this is real or not. I have to figure out if this was a kid who jumped out in front of me, or like if it was an adult who knew about the legend and knew it was around Halloween and just wanted to scare us. And so we went. There was no one on the property. There was no one near the property. There wasn't even like trash or anything that would have insinuated that a person was standing there or anything. But I did not sleep for 2 weeks because I just kept seeing that figure everywhere I looked, and it was so fucking creepy. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's my story.
Oh my God, that gave me chills. Like I'm like, what? And I put myself on mute because like I didn't want to like interrupt you, but you saw my
No,
faces.
please.
I went from like laughing to like, oh.
I know. I have to have my comedic breaks in there, or otherwise I'll be scared.
Okay, so a couple things that I was writing down. So it's interesting to me that, haunted roads, right? I
Hmm.
feel like haunted roads are found in almost every state. I feel like if
Yes.
anyone has had a haunted road urban legend, please let me know. Let us know because I'm very curious. So I lived in Colorado the last decade, and then in the last 2 years, I've been living here in LA County. And I was telling Kelsey this, but I think I told you this too. There's a haunted
Yeah.
road in Colorado that I didn't live far away from. And they had their urban legends too about it. And so, one of the things I did a deep dive during the pandemic, and this is going to tie into your story. Um,
I'm excited.
so I did a deep dive on this because I didn't know the phenomenon. Like, why is this road haunted, and how is it haunted, and what's going
Right.
on here? And after doing a deep dive, yes, there's like a history of like supposedly this guy went crazy and burned down the house and his family with it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and like disappeared. So that was that urban legend. They also allegedly said that they had a gates of hell. Now they put a park on top of it. The other thing
Oh.
is, yeah,
Oh my God.
interesting stuff, right? And then they said that there's also indigenous folklore around it. But one thing I
Okay.
found was an actual newspaper clipping of this poor girl that tragically went. It's a cold case. They never found out who killed her, who murdered her, but she worked at a local 7-Eleven, dropped off a customer asking for a ride. They never found who killed her, but they found her body on Riverdale Road. And so there's that. Now, because of that story, I think it's tied to the haunted Camaro that's being told in that story too. And so I guess my question, I know this is like a long-winded thing, but all this
Yeah.
to say is like, I know you mentioned it's an urban legend, but do you
Hmm.
know like if there's any like anything that happened there, like things of tragedy, whether there's indigenous roots there, like do you know anything else about the urban legend on that road?
So when digging through the legend, I didn't find anything that insinuated anything indigenous or anything uh tragic, but something that was like a folklore that happened, like an urban legend that really floated around, especially when I was in school, is that there was a human meat factory of some sorts, and which I have no evidence of this, and that they also
Oh,
think that like McDonald Hall in in BGSU is haunted, and I lived in McDonald Hall, and so I'm like, give it to me. I'm like, I want to see it.
yeah.
Um, but like I said, like being in rural Ohio, it wouldn't shock me if there were something like that. But we did find out from my friends who really dug into the archives. They said that they were able to find that a farmer like in the 1800s possibly murdered either his daughter, or he murdered his daughter's like boyfriend, and they think that that might have like sparked the legend of Holcomb Road, but like it's all based on like like scraps. It's
Yeah, like
based on
hearsay.
it's all based on hearsay, but the fact that so many people for generations, and if you go on YouTube, you will see like other BGSU students and locals have gone to Holcomb Road, and you will find like there's a terrifying video that actually made me go, was these kids, like they were probably college kids, but I'm calling them kids. They went to Holcomb Road and they did the whole thing, and you can actually see headlights like coming through. It was like a 2009 like YouTube upload. And so this legend is very well known. So the fact
Yeah.
that it's super well known makes me think that locals maybe know of like a truth behind it, and that since it's been carried on for so many years, there has to be something like maybe someone evil lived on the road. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like there has to be some truth like behind it. So,
Absolutely. Well, and so the other thing that struck to me too, and the reason why I ask about just like in general, anything in general, any of the past of history things, is because I strongly believe urban legends have some truth to it. Like you were saying, like
yes.
there might be some things piecing together. Same thing with like Riverdale Road in Colorado.
Mhm.
And the other thing that struck to me also is, okay, so here's a couple of my thoughts on the spiritual belief system side of
Mhm.
things. I think that when you mentioned that you have to go and you have to flash the headlights 3 times, I think that's like a form of a ritual. So, like the idea that multiple people are wanting to go to a place, and we got to think about how many times people go because they hear the urban legend and they want to experience something.
Yeah.
It's like putting on the bat signal of like I want something to happen here.
Right.
Like, and so in the spiritual side of things, when you do that, it does imprint, right? There's an imprint that gets created over and over again. And I always say this, like residual energy is a great example of that. When people do it over and over again, it creates some type of momentum, some type of
Yeah.
energy, some type of vibe to it.
I
The,
agree.
and so the other thing too is that you said that there was also like, so you said he was 8 feet
He was
tall.
tall. And the thing was is that I could see through him, but at the same time I couldn't.
Ooh,
So it was a very dense person. That's why I thought it possibly could have been a human. Like, you know those all one color skin suits that you could buy? I
yes.
low key thought that it was someone in one of those like all black ones, but what didn't make sense is I could see the trees. So I
Oh,
when he was
creepy.
coming towards me and I could see the sickle above his head, I could see through him, but like he was dense.
Yeah.
Like it felt like I could touch like a vapor is what it looked like. But what was so weird is that it was like 0.5 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes.
Well, because we get so hyper fixated on like what the heck is that your brain is
Yeah.
trying to process. What did you just see?
Yes.
And I guess like I've had 2 experiences now officially. The Queen Mary is the most recent one, where what you just said, it's like I'm blinking several times at what am I seeing directly because
Mhm.
it's it is physical, but it's also kind of transparent, like those crappy
Yes.
CCT footage things.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's what I was thinking of. It's so weird. Like you look like it's like solid, but then it looks also kind of like smoke. And so I'm
Yes.
like, what is happening?
And you know what? That reminds me too. So when I was in middle school, I've told the story a few times, but I'll simplify it here for this. But basically, I saw something like that too when I lived in a small town in Minnesota,
Yeah.
and it was chasing after us. And when I stopped to look at what was in front of me, because my house in Minnesota had a glass porch, so you had to walk through the glass porch to get to the front of the
Oh,
house. So which
okay.
is nice because
Yeah, pretty.
it's really pretty. So you would
Yeah.
walk in there, and then I locked it, and I'm looking through the glass door of the porch, and
Ooh.
this thing is just there staring. Like I'm saying staring, but like you just said, it's like it literally looks like somebody in a black suit.
Yes, I feel like I'm looking at their face.
Yeah. But you
Like I
can't
know
even
it's their
see
face.
anything. And it's weird
Right.
because like even though I know people are like, "Oh, well, it's dark." Yeah, it's dark, but light's supposed to still illuminate off features and stuff like that.
Yes.
Um
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but it was a full moon on the night that I saw this shadow thing chase after us.
Yeah.
And I could see like my friend, I could see like the trees, I could see the sidewalk, I could see things like illuminate, but I couldn't see this thing in front of me. And I don't know about you, but do you remember if it was like a full moon or if there was anything? I mean, obviously there was the headlights, so that's even weirder.
It was bright. It was bright. I do remember that. Like the headlights were one thing because they were mine were super dull. I had
Mm.
an old car, and so she was dull. But I could in rural Ohio, in rural anywhere, if you have headlights, you'll be able to see because there's no street lamps, there's no nothing that could illuminate or ruin it or anything. Like your light is your light, and that's it. But I do remember when I flipped my headlights off, the moon was very bright. So it easily could have been a full moon, and I just didn't even think about it. But I do remember it being light enough to where the tunnel of trees was illuminated enough, and I could see them behind the apparition.
See, that makes it weirder. You know what I mean?
And
Like,
I know.
it's weirder. Like, and I feel like obviously you're speaking to somebody that's also experienced something like that. So, yeah,
Yes.
it's weird to me. So, I think overall, if I had to summarize what you experienced, I do think it was some type of manifestation of an apparition. And it so happens that
Okay.
you happen to be doing a type of ritual thing. And then when people say rituals, they think of like candles and like satan. No, I'm talking
Right.
about a
And I didn't
ritual.
even get to do it. I turned off my headlights. I didn't even get to do the 3 blinking, and so it was like waiting
Oh,
for someone to come
interesting.
and say hi.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. So I think like there's a couple things with that, right? I think there's the
Mhm.
idea that a bunch of people are there wanting to experience something that is like virtualing for a bat signal, and then you have somebody that
Yeah.
was very scared to, like you mentioned, your friend being like, "I'm not doing this."
Yeah.
Um, so I think those are things that can really draw up things. And if
Mhm.
it's a full moon, I'm wondering if there's some type of connection with that because for me, I know it was a full moon and it was the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, maybe it was very bright, and I am a girl that loves the full moon. I love going outside and looking at it. So, it was bright enough to where it easily could have been.
Interesting. Yeah. So
It was weird.
I think it was an apparition, but you never know. It could be
Okay.
somebody in a bodysuit too.
I honestly, I would rather it be an apparition, even though I don't believe in ghosts. I'm so scared of people. I'm like, please, I would rather you be an apparition,
Same
not
though.
someone. Yeah, I'm like, please, I'd rather you be a ghost, please.
Okay, cool. So now that you shared one of like the definitely creepiest paranormal experience, what is your definition? Like, I mean, now that you mentioned this, and even still being a skeptic, which is so fair, by the way. Like, I was a skeptic, and I had plenty of experience. I'm like, I don't know what that is, something weird. But
Yes.
speaking of that, what is your definition of the paranormal? Like when you look at it through a big, like a through the lens of like what people have said and through your perspective in the media, like what is your definition of the paranormal?
My definition of the paranormal is I kind of separate it like case by case scenario, which sounds like a bitch answer, but it really is because, for instance, if someone passes away, that's someone super close to you, and you are just it's a horrible a grief and it's just weighing heavy on you, but out of nowhere you see an apparition or someone visits you in a dream, um and they're like, I'm okay, like I'm all right. And while that is so touching, and if I were to experience that, maybe I'd be singing a different tune. I genuinely think that that's your brain trying to provide some type of comfort to you, because death of a loved one is a traumatic experience, and we all know that trauma on the brain can cause your mind to play tricks on you, and it can do things to almost wrap itself up in a big hug. But when it comes to going to haunted locations, and for instance, if I wanted to go to a haunted asylum and I knew, like, okay, if I go to floor 3, there's supposed to be a little girl that plays with a ball down the hallway. Well, I want to see that so badly that I think that my brain can manifest that. So I really think that the paranormal is sometimes your mind playing tricks on you, or your mind comforting you. But I do think that there is a sliver of stuff that just I cannot explain, and that other, skeptics, we can't really explain, and so that little percentage is the thing that I wanna really get into, really, like, experiencing, can possessions actually happen? Can spirits actually attach to you? What is demonology? Like really exploring into like, are demons real? Do certain religions not believe that a demon can be a physical being, or can it attach to you? So the paranormal is a wide, vast ocean, I feel, of so many different things. But when it comes to the everyday ghost, I think it could be just a manifestation that you bring because you either want to see it or your mind just feels like it needs it, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I love that. And we're going to
Okay.
get into like the category. So I love that you brought that up because it's so important. And even like for me, I know that I'm on the stance of like, I do, psychic workshops, I do seances and stuff like that too. And
Yeah.
so I really love that you really talked about that because I think it's so important to also distinguish those things too. Because I think there needs to be a balance, whether you are a skeptic or even if you are open to this stuff and you strongly believe in the paranormal, to have a balance to ground ourselves because it's not only just good to be a well rounded person and open minded, but also like for your own mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
like so that's why I love that you categorized it. So and with that being said too, do you think that like mainstream media, do you think that plays a huge role with like how people view the paranormal and supernatural phenomenon?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I'm guilty of that
Mhm.
because when I was this age, when I had that paranormal experience, I did not have a respect for the paranormal field. And I grew up watching those TV shows, like you see them everywhere, like, oh, we're gonna go and we're gonna like put ourselves down in this haunted basement where this person like slaughtered all these people, and we're gonna just sit here and just vibe. And then they get like this horrible EVP, and like you hear all this stuff. So it didn't feel real to me,
Yeah.
and it just didn't I liked the thrill of it. It's like watching a horror movie. I liked the thrill of it. But something that I've realized over the years and really experiencing some kind of almost unexplainable things, and then talking to people who are in this field and truly believe all of this stuff, and they're not gimmicky or anything, just like you. Um they the mainstream media and the movies that are being made, my favorite one to, like, use as an example is, like, the Conjuring series, and that is
Yes.
that's because, like, it's cool, right? Like, from the outside, you're like, "Okay, the Warrens were demonologists, they were Catholic, they were XYZ, they just wanted to help people." But then you watch the movie, and then you go and read what actually happened, and the trauma that I believe it was the Parish or the Perrin family, um,
Yeah, the parent
actually
family.
Perrin?
Hmm.
Okay, the Perrin family actually went through, and you're like, the mom, that was in the story, the real life mother, she wanted nothing to do with the film. She wanted nothing to do with any of it, and it was exaggerated, and so I'm like, "Oh," like the Bathsheba. Bathsheba is who made me really agitated because Bathsheba wasn't a witch. She was a real person whose grave was completely defiled because of these movies. And so I'm like, okay. All right. I'm like, that's where my like victim advocacy true crime brain like turned on. I was like,
Yeah.
who are you guys to judge Bathsheba, and you didn't even know her? Like, she's not even alive to speak her mind, and then all these people are making all this money off of exaggerating this family story. And so that's when I was like, okay, there is a distortion between like reality and then Hollywood.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. And like it's interesting that you bring that up because when I was like a kid, I would really heavily consume, and back in the 90s, I'm a millennial, so back in the 90s, like
Mhm.
we had the rise of paranormal supernatural shows, whether it's like reality TV
Oh
or
yeah.
non-reality TV. Like you had Sabrina the Teenage Witch, you had Charmed, you had
Oh
X-Files.
yes. Yes.
I had all these great shows of the 90s, and I think in a way that shaped, at least for me, shaped how I viewed the paranormal. Even like the Blair Witch Project, when that came
Yes.
out, I was like, that freaked me out. I thought that was
Yeah.
reality. So it's interesting because then we see the rise of reality TV, and to your point, like they sensationalize these things. And I think the Conjuring franchise, the equivalent of what I just mentioned is a Conjuring franchise of the 2010s. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
so it's interesting how we go into this, and this is gonna be really important because I want to talk to you and to the audience about like how people view the supernatural and how I think that shapes whether we stand on believing or not believing.
Mhm.
Um, so I love that you brought up categories because there's often like I forgot the name of the expert, but I'm going to put sources in the description. But they break them down into categories more or less. There's the religious supernatural phenomenon, like Ed and Lorraine Warren bring it into their whole
Mhm.
Catholic demonology, and then there's also the non-religious paranormal phenomenon where you don't know if you are a believer. You just went somewhere one day and you're like, I experienced something, and
Right.
that might be a ghost, it might not be something, or even like UFO phenomenon, I think is definitely not religious. But some
Mhm.
people are now trying to tie it into that, which is interesting.
Really?
Yeah, we
Huh.
could talk a little about that. So there's there's people that really lean into the idea that UFOs, like alien phenomenon, isn't really like it's not physical, like the way you and I are physical to this plane. It's more of like a spiritual being in some aspects.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
I've never heard
crazy.
that concept.
Yeah, the more I dive into like Reddit and talk to people in person, they
Yeah.
strongly believe that like that's what it is. And then of course you have like the idea, and I didn't know this until 2020 when I made a TikTok on it and people
Mhm.
educated me on this, but the whole reptilian conspiracy where like there's this idea that the 1% are shape-shifting reptilians and that is anti-Semitic. I had no idea.
I did not know that either. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so that's why I never talk about that anymore. Like I did one
Yeah.
video, but the video that I did do was about how this girl I knew in Denver, she believed in reptilians. She believed that so her and I met through a psychic development certification
Okay.
and through a spiritualist church, and she was really interesting to say the least. Needless to
Mhm.
say, the relationship her and I had as a friend, like platonic relationship that we had, it just dissolved
Didn't
very
work
easily.
out.
Yeah, it didn't work out. But she believed in reptilians. Like she told me how she went on a Tinder date and the date's roommate did not like her and was a reptilian. And I'm like, what the heck? Yeah, it's weird.
Okay.
Weird stuff. Yeah. And then she would always like I guess like glorify how she was like her master's degree, how she had a high IQ. I'm like, and I want people to understand this too, like how it's so important that paranormal phenomenon and IQ there isn't I thread lightly with that because I feel like
Yeah.
like what does that really mean? Because this girl got her master's degree, has
Mhm.
allegedly high IQ enough that where she was on like apparently Tinder has like the very specific has a very specific thing that you can sign up for if you have a high IQ to date other people with high IQ or something ridiculous
Oh
like that.
my God. Get out of here. Everyone
Yes.
lies. Everyone's lying on there.
All right. Because what's emotional intelligence versus like, like there's emotional intelligence too that people always like slide like try to like not really glorify because they're academically gifted or whatever. But anyway, so I love that you brought up the categories. So there's this guy, Peter Underwood, I believe is his name, and
Mhm.
he talks about the several types of paranormal phenomena. There's elementals, poltergeists, historical ghosts, like the White
Oh,
House
yeah.
being haunted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mental imprint, like I was saying, residual energy earlier with your
Mhm.
story, death apparitions, time slips, UFO stuff that I would say, and ghosts that are living off of inanimate objects like haunted dolls.
Okay.
Um, so I'm not sure if when you mentioned categories, did you ever like I know that you've been talking to people about it and you've done true crime stuff, but did you ever think about like how intricate the paranormal can be like that? Because it's kind of interesting even for me.
No. I never knew it was that intricate and that there was so many classifications and subcategories. Like, I truly thought that there was like I thought it was mostly religious because every
Yeah.
horror movie, I swear to God, literally is like there's a crucifix hanging and it goes upside down when the demon comes in. And so I'm like, all right. So if anyone has a cross in their house, it's going to go upside down, like everybody get the fuck out, like we're all gonna die. But it's all situated around like religion or religious trauma, or like it's a nunnery and there's like something horrible going on in the nunnery, and then it's like, so I really only thought that it was religion for a long time,
Yeah.
just solely based on no research. I never researched into it. I only was consuming media and
Yeah.
movies. So based on only that, I was like, wow, okay, so it's like demonology. It's like Catholicism. It's
Hmm.
spiritualism. And so then learning everything else, I was like, all right, I know jack shit. I was like, all right, I know nothing, but I love knowing nothing because I love continuously like learning. And this is a whole new subject. So
Yeah.
learning that there's like inanimate objects, there's I just learned recently, I think it might have been you who taught me, but it was how ghosts can or spirits can like relive the same time, like
Oh
it's like a
yeah.
loop. And so I learned about that and I was like, oh my god, I was like, is that gonna happen to all of us? I was like, what if you die like trying to like make coffee in the Keurig and you're just like forever, you're just like putting the K cup into the coffee machine and you're like, damn, this sucks. Like I'm just making medium roast fucking coffee for the rest of my eternity. Like so there was just so many things and so that's what I want to study is I'm like, okay, so there's so many categories. Where does it group?
Yeah.
Where does it come together to where it's one big philosophy?
Imagine like a haunted coffee maker. Like the next generation of paranormal investigators are going to be like, this is a haunted coffee maker. Everyone in America used to do this in the 2000s up in 2020.
It's like a Nespresso machine. Like it's the bougie, like Keurig. It's Keurig's rich sister. It's the Nespresso. It's like one of the virtual pop ones that they made, and it's like light blue. Like, yeah, it was owned by an influencer like way back in the day, and she used to do her get ready with me's in front of this Nespresso, and so
Oh, it's so
sometimes you take a
funny.
picture, you just see her selfies like
Yeah, they
in the
say.
Nespresso. She's just making lattes forever.
Or like haunted old Starbucks. I can imagine. I'm just, jeez. I was curious. I'll be curious about that.
Yes. Oh my
Um,
god.
Well, speaking of that, right? So that's a great, wonderful transition to this because in 2013, there was this Harris poll that found that 42% of Americans believe in ghosts. And in the UK, they found that 52% of respondents believe in ghosts as well, which
Oh,
is a huge jump from the 1970s. And as we were talking about, like the
okay.
Warrens and, the categories of religion and non religion, it's so interesting because I feel like society now is less religious than even in the 70s. There was like the puristic culture of the 80s.
Absolutely.
And so, like, why do you think that is? Like, do you think it's like media, mainstream? Like, what are your thoughts?
I mean, in our day and age, I think media plays a big role in everything.
Hmm.
Just because that's how most of our generations get news, and so we'll find out about things that we've never known about, and we're like,
Hmm.
"Oh shit, this is a big deal." So, I think when it comes to religion, media brought on like for instance, what brought me to like question religion was like molestation in churches and knowing about sexual abuse that was happening and how we knew partial about it that it like could have been happening but no one really said anything because these religious figures are so respected and they're so powerful, which is weird cuz they're not supposed to be god, but like they sometimes get treated like god. And so I think that when it comes to that is that religion has been seen as almost a protection of evil because a lot of people weaponize their religion in order to say horrible things, and they're like, well, my religion says X, Y, and Z. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's not my religion, so that's fine that you believe that, but like relax. Relax. um but yeah, no, I think people have over the years seen that the weaponization of religion is just like it's toxic. Like it's a toxic relationship and that it turns people off completely to wanting to explore religions and wanting to maybe see if they have a faith that they align with. And so that media has played a portion in that because I think media has unearthed a lot of horrible things that have been kept under the rug.
My God, yeah, well said. Because it's interesting, right? Because we know the 70s and 80s. like you said, there's like like there's just a rise of religious
Yeah.
agenda back then, and even like politically as well. You talked about the categories of religious versus not religious, and people are believing more and more paranormal phenomenon and the categories as well. And there's also the tie-in that people are becoming more educated as well, which is interesting because
Hmm.
I'm going to bring up some statistics here about how like when people are more educated, they believe less of these things. But I have some rebuttals and interesting thoughts on that.
I'm
So,
ready.
okay, so now that we are like we're in this timeline of more educated people and understanding things and becoming less religious.
Hmm.
So there is precognition, so the ability to see the future. That's also included in supernatural phenomenon. Life forms, cryptids like the chupacabra, Bigfoot, right? That's
Hmm.
another cryptid thing. Spiritualism, the idea of communicating with the dead. Superstitions like urban legends, like we talked about haunted roads. Witchcraft, the idea that people are practicing that. Of psychic abilities, telekinesis, which is interesting because the CIA did a whole thing on. They love telekinesis stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
So it's interesting because with more education, there's people that are wanting to study these things and really like categorize it yet again.
Hmm.
But these have overlaps things. Like I feel like precognition, spiritualism, witchcraft, psychic abilities, all of these telekinesis, these are actually all can be overlapped within I think spiritualism, psychic beliefs, and all that stuff, which is interesting that they separate it. But really, I think they can go hand in hand in some aspects if people are hardcore practitioners in these things.
Hmm.
So the reason why I bring up these overlaps of like witchcraft, psychic abilities, and all this stuff is because in mainstream media, in reality TV, we see that there's even a gender. Like it's so important how gender plays a role with beliefs as well.
Hmm.
So like we talked about X-Files, which I thought was interesting because if someone would explain the concept of X-Files, would you think that Scully would play the female role or the male role?
Ooh. Honestly, probably male.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, probably male.
And maybe like it's maybe shame on us for, but also like come on, like we
My
can walk.
bad.
My bad, but also like just the way that it's depicted in the media since like the '90s and
Yeah.
'80s and like all this stuff. Like I've always felt like that felt like a masculine role, which kudos to X Files to giving it to Scully though. I love that it
Right.
was a woman playing a role that was someone that could be logical and like grounded and factual. I love that.
Yes.
In the science field, right? It's been thought of as being a very masculine dominated field. And
Yeah.
to some aspect, I see it more now than ever. And I mean, what is your perception of that? When you think of like the science field, is it more masculine? Is it more feminine? Like, what are your thoughts and critiques about the science field?
Um, well, I think that there's a really big issue with internalized misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that's embedded. I mean, simply just because of like movies we've seen growing up where the big, strong hero in the film is probably most likely a man, and the damsel in distress is some pretty little blonde girl or something. But I mean, that's exactly how I think of it, is that the smartest scientist back then, I think now in movies we're way more equal in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like balancing the super smart scientist and the maybe the dumb one, or the
Yeah.
sidekick might be a man. um but in terms of like what we grew up on, absolutely. The scientist was a man, and the people who founded everything was a man, and like men got a lot of credit. They got a lot of
Yes.
credit.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like that people need to consider these things when they're looking at like statistics and education and stuff like that. Because I feel like when it comes to the sciences, it's objectively favored and the interpretations are more material, physical type of sciences rather than even social sciences. I had an astrologist here. She has like a PhD in like religion and
Oh
something
wow.
else. Yeah, she's amazing. She was on the astrology podcast episode I did with her, and she was trying
Wow.
to pitch her astrology, academic astrology, to Psychology Today, and they wouldn't have it. And it's so important to talk about how social sciences don't even have a fair chance, whereas like the physical, material type of sciences have more ground to it, which I understand, right? It's more visual.
Mhm.
You can repeat it over and over again versus social
Yeah.
sciences have some type of even that I feel like social sciences need a lot of work.
Yeah, that's true.
So in this field they often disregard like non-material things, super spiritual things, which I saw this TikTok 2020 where a psychologist was basically bashing people for practicing astrology and all this stuff because then
What?
he made a whole TikTok.
Why?
It went viral. He's like, imagine getting all of your studies and academic and going to college and only to get clients that try to like undo that by like doing astrology. I'm like, what the heck?
Oh, I love the close-mindedness. You're awesome. Thank you, sir. You're great.
Yeah. And in a way, this is really hurtful because it's hurt women, it's hurt marginalized communities, indigenous communities specifically as well.
Absolutely.
Um, whereas some of these communities have spoken about things that were debunked only later to be, finally proved correct by a white Western man in some type of science.
Mm-hmm.
So, as an example to this, we have like Western science has historically dismissed meditation, acupuncture, viewing them as just mysticism, where we actually feel like there is some type of level of credibility to that. And, there's cultures that still practice these things. We also have like one of my other ones that I saw recently on TikTok was this person that was doing a video on, oh, did you know that plants could speak to each other? And it's like, meanwhile, indigenous people have been saying this for like centuries, forever, really forever.
Oh, yes. That's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah, like I saw the video and almost sent it to my friend because I have a friend. He is a Navajo paranormal investigator. His brother is a medicine man. He is actually like one of the protectors of a sacred mountain in Arizona. And he did a video on
Wow.
how people are smudging incorrectly or using sage incorrectly. And
Hmm.
in his video, he goes into this deep dive of how when you use sage, even though that is technically a very sacred herb to indigenous people or
Hmm.
the Americas, right? The indigenous people of the Americas, like people buy smudge or sage, dried sage at a Walmart or some type of chain store
Yeah.
when the teaching was to go out there, find the plant and give an offering and let it be known of what your intention is with that herb or plant.
Hmm.
And so he's basically saying that people are smudging incorrectly because of that. And so then I see a video of this person like, did you know that science has proven that plants can talk to each other? I'm like,
Yeah, no shit. Thank you so much for adding nothing. Thank you.
like kudos to like for science to catch up and prove it, but it just goes to show that like for centuries people have been talking about plants being able to communicate, and then meanwhile in the 2020s
Yeah.
they're like, oh, by the way, it took such a long time. And I think that's my whole point of like how
Yeah.
spirituality and cultural belief systems do have some credibility even if it's not an academic subject, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And plus, that's so frustrating. Like, y'all already said it. Like, I already said this years ago.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay. And so, again, we go back to like how women are more likely to be more open-minded to these things or more receptive, as well as marginalized communities. And then, of course, we have, there's this woman, her name is Antares Russell Visque. I feel bad. She wrote about how modern paranormal TV walks the fine line between propaganda and also like talking about history, suggesting that older white men are rational while marginalized communities such as youth, lower class society, such as women and minorities, are hysterical and gullible for believing into these things. White privilege is definitely performed and glorified in reality paranormal television. So, what are your thoughts on all that? Like, I know that it sounds to me like you're very open minded to it, and you do sit the fine line of like, here's the logical, but then understanding that there might be something else to sciences and factual thinking.
And that's a really good question. So, because I have like so many answers just came into my head. Because I was like, first off, when I heard like white men being considered like very rational in history, my mind went straight to the Salem witch trials and how totally irrational those white men were, and how like literally the most irrational, like emotional bitches I've ever seen in history are these men that were like, this woman has land, witch, you're
Which
a witch,
she's
kill
well
her.
spoken. Kill
Yeah,
her.
kill her, she does not deserve land. She does not deserve this. So like that's where my mind went for when you said that. But when it comes to like the fine line of, being a rational thinker and then being open-minded to the spiritual realm and the paranormal and even demons, like the conversation of like demons in the church and all this stuff. I think it comes with the fact that you have to be okay to know when you know nothing. Because if I were to walk into, if for instance, a paranormal investigation and it was like it was you and it was just everybody who was super well known in the paranormal community, maybe they were mediums, maybe they were
Mhm.
just spiritual, um, maybe they know a lot about ghosts and they know more about like they have like a more faith-based approach to it. Um, I genuinely think that it would just mostly be the fact that I'm okay with knowing that I don't know everything. There's no way to know absolutely everything. And if you do know everything, then there's no fun in that. Like
Yeah.
there's no more fun in learning. And so, but to think that there could be a possibility of the paranormal existing, that would be everything to me. Because as someone who like gets really freaked out, especially about like death and mortality, do you know how amazing that would be to know that like there is something so much more that could be like you being a little spirit that like goes everywhere and like has a ball? Because in my mind I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of scariness behind it, there's a lot of creepy things, but like what if it's cool? Like what if it's chill? What if it's fun? And so really, as a rational thinker, I know that there are things that your mind can do. I know that there's emotions that can trigger certain parts and aspects of your brain to make you see things that aren't really there. But there's also a part of me that's like, but what if?
No, I love that. Yeah, because I think that like I always say this to people. I feel like most people that get into the paranormal, they either had an experience or I found that people are really afraid of dying, which makes sense that that's why they get
Yeah.
into this work. Uh, and whereas like my experience was very different in some aspects to that, but I can resonate with why people get into it. But on the other hand, like I know several people that are skeptics and maybe non-believers of the paranormal that
Hmm.
really want to believe because they see how beautiful it is to prove this could mean so much to an individual.
Yes.
And I think that's so important for people to keep in mind on wherever they stand with this stuff. So speaking, now that we mentioned that, right, like how there's, even though there's highly educated people that are less likely to believe in the paranormal, we have to distinguish what are they studying, right? Because like
Hmm.
I studied, like I was going to be an art teacher, so I had to study fine arts and history. Whereas like, I have my sister who studied nursing. She doesn't touch anywhere near the gravity of culture and history as much as I do versus someone in nursing is going to learn more about biology and anatomy, right?
Right.
So like, it's an interesting intricate like what exact when we talk about education, what are we specifically talking about? Because somebody who is studying nursing or going to school for nursing versus like a lawyer or a teacher, those are very vast things. And
Hmm.
I feel like for me, at least when I went to college, I got really philosophical with a lot of things that I did do. So I think it's an interesting thing to put in perspective on that. And meanwhile, we have, cultures that have been talking about things for centuries, and then it
Yes.
just finally science is finally proving some of that, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's really important for people to understand, like when you set a source to make people feel dumb for believing in something, we have to keep the perspective of like, well, what kind of education, where do they stand, and also like, is there a cultural significance? And let's be respectful of that. There are studies that show that men are more likely than women to believe in like alien visitations, UFO phenomenon, in terms of that Harris poll. So like they are more likely to believe in Bigfoot, UFO, and Sasquatch, which makes so much sense because as we
Yeah.
just said, men are more like they consume our science fiction in general. We think of Star Wars and all that stuff,
Oh yeah.
and also like Ancient Aliens, X Files. That's a high male demographic thing, which
Hmm.
reinforce why they might believe in these things, right? But then
Yeah.
also like according to Marvin Zuckerman, he wrote this book on gender biases and stuff like that in 1994, and he talks about how men are more generally more prone to risk-taking behaviors and higher probability of novelty seeking, so like going on adventures and stuff like that.
Okay.
They also adopt these beliefs because they're capable, they believe that they see themselves as capable of exploring and discovering the unknown, which makes sense, right? When I see like, and I don't know your stance on this, but I've
Mhm.
watched once in a while TikTok or even Instagram, I'll see people exploring abandoned places. I see more men
Yes.
doing that than women.
I do too, actually. But I don't think that women get like the attention. Like if that makes any sense, like their
Yeah.
videos are so like below, like they don't even get like the time of day from the
Yeah.
algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I mean, I think there's a couple factors what you just said, but also like I would love to visit abandoned places, but I'm scared of going by myself. And I don't have enough like
I
friends
felt
that would
that.
go.
I would go if you were near me. I
Oh,
would go
yes.
with you.
And like, I'm going to add this too because it just made me think of like when I read about Sam and Colby. They're like this
Mhm.
huge YouTuber paranormal dynamic duo. And I know that they started off like Vine at one point, I think, and they were comedians. And then they also visited abandoned places. And then they got
Mhm.
really big in the paranormal field. And it's like you just said, I think getting that attention from that perspective and having the access and confidence to explore these places where I feel like women, I know so many women that are like, I want to go visit, but I'm
Oh
scared of going by
yeah.
myself.
Well, because we're scared of the people. Like
Mhm.
women are not scared to go to these hospitals and or these abandoned hospitals and asylums because we're like,
Yeah.
oh no, we're so scared. We're gonna get possessed. No, I'm scared that there's a crazy ass axe man that's living in that room that I don't know about. That's what I'm scared of.
Okay, so it's interesting too because despite that UFO phenomenon and all this stuff is paranormal phenomenon, it also makes it seem like, oh, if you can study something or you can make it look some type of sciency or pseudoscience, there's
Hmm.
some credibility, which reinforces what I just said, the narrative of like people believing that science and physical science is male dominated and that's the truth. And
Right.
like, just all these factors. Oh, I want to dive into a little bit about how like a little bit more statistics with like marginalized communities as well.
Okay.
So I know we mentioned it earlier, but it's this one was interesting that I found. So it was found that black women without a bachelor's degree were most likely to believe in hauntings, while white and Asian American respondents were least likely to believe in hauntings. Even though Asian American women might be more likely to fear ghosts. And I think like all of this to say is that people have different definitions of ghost activity, paranormal phenomenon. So, as I mentioned, there's UFO, there's hauntings, there's ghosts. But I think, like with this in particular, if while Asian American people are less likely to believe in hauntings, but they fear more likely to, they scored highest in fearing ghosts. I think
Hmm.
that's an ancestral thing. Which
Yeah.
did you ever make that connection with like? Because even for me, it took me a minute when I was like studying about paranormal phenomenon. That like ancestral work is ghosts, but we have different definitions, like more Western
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah. It's almost like it's like a spiritual, like
Mm-hmm.
connecting with their spirit. So it almost is very ghostly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they have like I know like when I watch like anime, I watched Fruits Baskets. Yeah.
Oh,
Like yeah.
yeah.
I have like a tattoo here. Cute.
I love it.
But like Toru, her mom had passed away in the beginning of, so Toru was like the lead, her character is the lead in Fruits Baskets, and her mom had passed away. And there's an episode where they all go to the mom's her burial site, and they have a picnic, they bring food, they do like all this fun stuff. And I
Hmm.
just feel like here in the Americas, we don't really celebrate death in the same way, or like Day of the Dead is another example, or in Central
Yeah.
America we call it All Saints Day, so we do something similar but not, we don't call it Day of the Dead. I'm Salvadorian, so
Hmm.
there's different cultures that have a way of honoring the dead, whether it's doing offerings. And what are your thoughts? Have you ever grown up doing any type of thing or like an honoring passed on
So, I mean,
people?
half of my mother's half Cuban. And so we have family that escaped Cuba and came over a while ago. And so I had the absolute like honor of being able to really experience some of Cuban culture and experiencing that. And they came from, they're very Catholic.
Ooh.
So they were very, very Catholic. And there's actually a rosary in my family that gets like passed down like through generations. And so there was something that we do is we have a table that has everyone who has passed. And I never knew that that was something that was almost a, I don't know if it was more, I think it was just culture, really, is that it wasn't religious, but it was just culture of that you respected them by putting them somewhere where they can always be seen and they're displayed in the house with the other relatives and that have passed. And even if they're from a different side of the family that may not be Cuban, um, they all were on the same table in like a gold frame, or if it was an original frame that was from their home, or something like that. But that is something that I grew up with that I carry now. And so when I started dating my boyfriend, he had both of his grandparents, or excuse me, both of his grandfathers pass away, and I put them on the table, and I have like a little table, and I put them on the their frames, their pictured frames on the table with my grandfather who had passed away. And he was like, what? And I was like, this is just something that I grew up with. Like it's a respect thing of they have passed, but you still honor them as if they're still here.
I love that so much. Yeah, because I know, like, even in Cuba, Puerto Rico, like the islands and South America, I don't know. I never know what their way of honoring. I feel like, at least here in the United States, most of the time you're not going to see that unless you are in a state with a predominant, maybe like different community or marginalized community. Like here in LA, for example, because when I lived in Denver, I would visit cemeteries and graveyards. They never did anything lively ever. Like I never saw it
Yeah.
decorated the way it is here in LA. So for here, like obviously Day of the Dead is one of them. Um, in the holidays, like where my grandpa is buried, it's so lively. There's music, there's like all these beautiful decorations throughout the whole cemetery.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and so like that's a norm, but I don't see that. So all this to say is that like I really think that through the Western perspective of paranormal things and ghosts and things of that nature, it removes the ancestral definition. And I think out of respect, right? But also like I know as a medium when I've gone to places, I'm like, oh, there's an energy here. And then like someone's like, oh, well, this is where we still keep like all of our altars or all of our things here. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's why there's an
Right.
energy here. So who's to say if the paranormal and if paranormal equipment holds some type of level of credibility that you go into a place and they're like, hey, there's energy here. I don't know what it is. It's ghost. But maybe it was like a room that they
Ghosts.
kept. But yeah, but maybe it was like a room where they kept like they honored past loved ones in that room or something. I don't know, right? Just
Yeah.
hypothetically saying, right?
Right. And
Um,
like going off of your point of like how it is in the Western world is I truly think, now this is like, this is just an opinion,
yeah.
but I truly think that that's why so many like us Westerners are scared of death, and we're
Yeah.
scared of dying because we look at the cemetery and we see it's like it's dreary, it's sad, there's no flowers, it's no one goes there. And so you're like, wow, that's the end. And so you have this like gloomy, horrible outlook of just like, God, I don't want to do that. And so everyone spirals. And so you're like, oh shit. But if you were to grow up in a culture that really honored and celebrated life and had parties in cemeteries and really just like honored everybody, that would be different. Maybe Westerners wouldn't have such a dreary outlook on death. Maybe it would be more of like a, it is your time when it's your time, and when it is, everyone's still going to remember you, and it's going to be great. Maybe you're going to
Yeah.
come up and party with us, like, you know, like it's more of a lively outlook, which I love.
Yeah, yeah, because and, you know, I often thought about that when I was looking at the statistics and I was listening to other people talk about the statistics, and it's always like, well, highly educated people are less likely to believe in paranormal phenomenon, blah 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 blah. But I think it's becoming oversaturated with definitions of paranormal phenomenon, while
Yeah.
also forgetting what people have already spoken about with ancestral magic or ancestral work, ancestral, honoring their ancestors, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And one tidbit I wanted to add to the education aspect too is that education is often seen. I want to read this here from what I wrote. Education is often seen as a way to reduce superstition and increase rational thinking. However, it's very crucial to understand that education itself can be biased. So, like for example, Black Americans historically had a tradition of intergenerational oral culture that can be traced back to enslavement, but this stuff isn't really taught in colleges or high schools. Maybe in
Right.
some part of the United States, but I can't recall a huge deep dive.
No.
Um, So superstitions and stories of ghostly visitations were very important or predominant in African American folklore, which may have shaped the belief system of some Black Americans today. So, according to the Pew Research Center, 9 in 10 Black Americans say that they learned about their history through oral storytelling rather
Hmm.
than um, like an education system. And so I think this goes back to why it's so important that like yes, education is great.
Yeah.
Be a rational thinker, honor those sciences, honors the facts that have been proven, but it's okay to still have your truths. And the truths is like whether you believe in the paranormal, that is your truth, and like sticking to that, whether it's important to your cultural beliefs or something that you grew up with. It doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you anything but
Yeah,
being balanced
absolutely.
about it.
Yeah, and I mean, being educated, for instance, like having a ton of education and like you have your doctorate or whatever, the basis of these studies, if we're talking about just like paranormal and spiritual and like and learning how to be a cognitive thinker and really just having all of those logic and rational based rational discussions, it it was all built off of white rational thinkers. So it's like, yes, these are ideas, these are things that are maybe founded with a lot of data, maybe, X, Y, and Z, but there's no variety. It was all built on a white rational religious foundation, and so you're just like, oh no, it cannot be that because my book says it's not. I'm like, okay, who wrote the book?
Yeah.
like like while it's fine to use it as a trampoline and bounce ideas off of it and maybe be like, well, because of this, this is what this means, but it's like, dude, like no, you have to branch out, you have to get all of the research. That's why I love it, because the research never ends,
Yeah.
because there are stories that you can only learn by just talking to people that aren't written down.
Absolutely. I love that. Would you say a level of like 1 through 10, how skeptical do you feel like you are towards a lot of these like paranormal phenomenons? Well, I hope that, you gained some insight on some paranormal. I don't know. Or
Oh,
maybe you knew stuff, or it sounds like you knew a
absolutely.
lot of it, but
No, I learned a lot being on here, and I love that like you were able to have like these conversations with someone who is skeptic, because you were skeptic yourself, and so you get to really have a different perspective now. And so now that I'm a skeptic and I'm like, 5.5 out of 10, or at a 0, um but that's awesome. And so this is just awesome. Like this was so
oh,
fun, and I got to learn so much, and I love
yeah.
having these talks with you.
Well, thank you. Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Miss Pammy Jay. And then of course, from there you can find the Haunted Detective podcast page. We're posting new podcast episodes every Monday at midnight, and it's anywhere where you get your podcast.
Yeah, and you guys, I love your podcast. Seriously,
Thank you so much. I love yours.
oh, thank you.
My
Well,
gosh.
so remember, everybody, stay
Stay
strange.
strange.
Woo.